We are looking at Unit 15 in this video, so welcome back, and let's go ahead and dive right into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And starting off with 15.1, we're looking at what are called the A verbs, the A verbs, I should say. And these, these verbs in the perfective forms are marked off by the A in the perfective there, as you see there in the first syllable, and you got type A and type B verbs, and this section is going to deal with the three radical verbs. So remember, as you look at that column there under perfective, that three radical refers to those three syllables, adara, arafa, amama, azana, and so on. And the type A and B are distinguished by the infinitive form. So as you see just above that table here, you'll see that the vowel distribution is different for type A and B, and that will tip you off to which type it falls under. And notice that vowel distribution too as well, just to recognize how that changes as you go from, again, going back to the chart, as you go from left to right under type A and type B. So under type A, in the perfective, you have adara, and then in the infinitive, madar, and then in the imperfective, yadral. Whereas under type B, you have, say, adasa, madas, and yadasal, as you go from left to right there. So these forms here in the distributions, just take note of that, and that'll help you conjugate the verb, recognize the form, and go from one to another. Then we go to 15.2 to look at what are called causative verbs in a and as. And again, those refer to that first element of the verb. These, and here these are prefixes that are affixed to the perfective form. And what they do is they make what are called causative verbs. And we'll also look at reflexive verbs in the later section. But causative verbs mean either quote unquote causative or transitive. And so it's going to have to do with what the action is being applied to. And also there's a relationship with the simple form. So to go through, or I should say, in some cases, the difference may be, there may be a difference in meaning from the simple form. But we'll see this from the literal translation, what that causativeness is. So to look at this is an example in sentence one, you have darasa and madras, which means to arrive. He arrived to arrive. And then in the causative form, you have adarasa and madras, which is to take. And so in the causative sense, it's you're causing it to arrive. In sentence two, you have the simple form of mata or mamtat, to come. And then the causative form is amata mamtat, to bring. So you're causing something to come. Sentence three, qaraba makrab, to come near. Aqaraba makrab, to bring near, to present, to fetch. The vowel distribution in the causative verbs is the same as in the simple, except for the regular loss of that before the ah sound. So in that paragraph here, just at the bottom of the page, you have matalo, which means I'll come in that imperfective form. And you have yumatal, he'll come, amatalo, I'll bring. So that's that causative form of amatalo. Yamatal, he'll bring. So similar vowel distribution as you go from form to form, just with that different element. And that was 15.2.1. So let's go to 15.2.2. And these are the causative verbs where you have the as element up front. Again, looking, and this indicates action done by someone other than the subject of the verb. So to look at that first example, we have gaba, which is he entered, and then asgaba. He had someone else bring in something or somebody. So he is still the subject of the verb, but the action is being performed by someone else. Falaga, he looked for, he wanted. Asfalaga, he had someone look for something. Another thing to note here as well is that these verbs never have an prefix. They may have an as prefix, which can be causative or transitive. So you have aya, which is he saw. You have asaya, which is he showed, he caused someone to see, essentially. Alafa, he passed, so he or something passed, intransitive, not being applied to anything. But asalafa, passed or spent, as in caused to pass or caused to spend. So what this shows is that they may have an as prefix, but they won't have an a prefix. So these are, already in an a form. So they're not going to take on an a prefix and change. And all causative as verbs are formed from those three radical verbs, type A and B, or from type A and B, are all going to be type B. So to look at the example here, they have kafala, makfal, yakafla, to divide, type A. But when it becomes an as verb, it's the type B distribution, askafala, maskafal, yaskafala. So that means it's going to follow that type B vowel distribution. That's for a type A, three radical verb. Now with the type B, three radical verb, falaga, mafalag, yifalagal, it again goes to the type B distribution, asfalaga, masfalag, yasfalagal. So that's something to keep in mind. Whether it's a type A or B, in the simple form, in the as causative form, it's going to follow the type B distribution. Now let's look at 15.3, passive reflexive verbs. So passive, there's basically kind of two types here to kind of combine together. Your passive verbs are in the passive voice, and so that refers to the fact that the subject of the verb is receiving the action rather than doing the action. And then the reflexive verb is where the action is being done to oneself. Now, some of these verbs may have an active form. So like in this example here in this section, down at the bottom there, you see takabbala, he received, takamata, he sat down. So they have, when you look at it, you see, looks like a passive reflexive form, but the actual meaning is active in the active voice rather than in the passive voice. And then just above that, if you look at taktaba, he washed himself, aktaba, he washed, that refers to that reflexive form. And then you can see this table at the bottom of the page that just shows you the distinction between the passive and the active form. And one thing you'll notice when you look at the left side on the passive reflexive column, that is that the ta prefix is what distinguishes that form, that ta prefix at the beginning. Another thing that's important to note is that there are no passive reflexive forms of causative verbs in a or in as. Instead, you just have a passive reflexive in ta, which is based on the simple form and has both the basic and the causative meanings. So to look at those examples, agabba, he caused to enter, he married, that's a causative form. Based on the simple gabba, he entered. And then you have the passive is tagabba, he was married. So that tagabba it gets references back to the simple. Then you down on the next line, you have aya, he saw in the simple form. In the causative on the left side, it's asaya. And in the passive form, taya on the right. And there are some causative prefix verbs which don't have an independent simple form. So they just have the causative form. So that's something also keep in mind as well. And the meanings of those verbs may not be causative in nature. They just have that causative, that prefix. However, the verbs have a passive reflexive form, which are constructed in the simple base, just not in the form like other causative verbs. So you have there adaraga, he did. Tadaraga, it was done. Aganya, he found. Taganya, it was found. Now, one thing to note too, we saw with all these verb forms the ta prefix, but there could be other prefixes like ya or ma in the infinitive. And if that is the case, then that gets replaced. And the initial consonant of the stem is doubled. Here we can see what that looks like. Takafala is in the perfective form, so it has that ta prefix. Everything's normal there. But when you go to the infinitive, you change the prefix to ma, and then that first consonant there gets doubled. Makafal. Or in the imperfective, you have the y prefix, so it's yakaflal. Yakaflal. So again, doubling of that consonant as you go from the perfective to either the infinitive or the imperfective. And that's because the ta prefix is being changed to ma or ya. And the prefix, the t or t prefix of the verbs are also doubled after another prefix. So here in the table, in the perfective form, you have tawaka. Then when you go to the infinitive, where you have the m prefix, that t is doubled up. Matawak, yatawakal. Tadasa, perfective form there. Then you change the prefix to ma, and you double up that consonant. Matadas, yatadasal. And then this table here shows the distribution, the vowel distributions on 3 radical verbs, type A and B, for these forms. And a special note here is they give you it's read a little bit better here. I have a printed out version where this passive reflexive form of the verb malet, to say, which is irregular, is kind of whited out. So here in the PDF, it's read a little bit better. So the infinitive, you have babal, to be said, tabala, the perfective form, and then yibalal in the imperfective. And the preposition ba used with the passive forms corresponds in that meaning to the English meaning by. So when that passive reflective form is used in those examples, like takafala, it was paid. By whom? By kabara, but kabara takafala. Or the book was written to Safa by him, basun. So but it means by in that case. And then one final note on that section is that the passive verbs in the perfective may correspond to either the past or the present. So makinao tisabara may mean the car is broken or the car was broken, depending on the context. And with that, we'll go to 15.4. where we look at classification and notation. And there's a little bit of unclarity on this. The author's note says that going forward from here, new verbs will be given in the infinitive form only in the buildups. I'm not sure what the buildups are, if they belong to one of the following categories down below here in the table. But when I took a look over at Unit 16, I saw that he still presents the verbs in the same way. So not sure what that's referring to, but this table is definitely good to get familiar with. Again, partly for just to know what the vowel distribution is between the type A and type B forms, and then seeing how it evolves as you go from the perfective to the infinitive to the imperfective, and looking at the regular verbs, the causatives in in as, and then the passive reflective verb forms. Now let's go to 15, and then to the two radical verb forms. Let's look at note 15.5, the relational affix ka with the perfective forms. And then jump into 15.5.1, where we look at where it's used to mean if. This expresses a simple condition, and it's going to be similar to the one we saw in Unit 14, the previous unit, where you have a different construction there. You have the b prefix plus the short imperfective. The difference here, though, is that when you have ka, it indicates a little more doubt on the part of the speaker. So the speaker is conveying that there's something a little more doubtful about this. It may not happen. It's really almost hypothetical. And this is used in conditional, so it's a conditional clause referring to the future where the main verb, I believe, is in the perfective. Yeah, it's a conditional clause referring to the future perfective form with the ka prefix. Then they give you what the forms look like when you have ka prefix to the verb stems for alla and yalla. And that's also good to just review that and get familiar with that. Then we will look at 15.5.2, where we see now ka used as since. Here, the main clause is in the past tense and has ka affixed to it, meaning since or from the time of, and it could have the gerund jamro, from majamad, to begin, added on, but that's optional, so you may or may not see it. And this is similar to the reference back to Unit 5, where we first saw the ka prefix, where it meant from. It's the same use here with jamro. So it's kind of from whatever that verb is, kind of beginning or since that, beginning from that time, essentially. And it's similar, it could be used in combination with escadaras. We saw that also from Unit 5, which is from up to. And that finishes out Unit 15. Thanks for sticking with me through this, and it's onwards to Unit 16. Thanks.